The operating room buzzed with the sounds of machinery, a steady beeping of monitors and the soft whir of surgical equipment, creating a rhythm for the task at hand. Dr. Thomas Bradley, known for his unflappable demeanor and unmatched precision, stood at the center of it all. His gloved hands worked meticulously on a middle-aged patient's gallbladder, the movements fluid, almost robotic in their efficiency. "Scalpel," he called out without looking, his tone clipped and impersonal. One of the scrub nurses stepped forward, placing the instrument in his hand, but the seamless pace was interrupted by the swooshing sound of the operating room doors. In walked Emily Harris, a seasoned nurse with a sterling reputation, but also a figure who commanded polarized reactions from her colleagues. Her dark skin contrasted starkly against the sterile whites and blues of the room, her eyes steady, projecting calm even as tension rippled invisibly around her. "I was asked to assist," Emily announced, her voice steady but her heart racing. She had been pulled into the procedure at the last minute when another nurse had to step out for an emergency. Dr. Bradley barely acknowledged her presence. "Vitals," he snapped, nodding toward the monitors. "Understood," Emily responded, stepping into place. She quickly absorbed the details of the surgery's progress and positioned herself to assist wherever needed. Her movements were smooth, calculated, yet careful not to disturb the rigid hierarchy that Bradley seemed determined to maintain. The surgery progressed without issue, until a small moment turned everything on its head. "Clamp," Bradley commanded, his hand outstretched. Emily moved swiftly to comply. As she reached to hand him the instrument, her elbow brushed lightly against his sleeve, an unintentional mistake in an otherwise flawless execution. Dr. Bradley froze mid-action, his head snapping toward her. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked, stepping back as if she'd committed an unforgivable sin. His glare bore into her, filled with something far heavier than annoyance. "I apologize, doctor," Emily said, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her chest. "It was unintentional." Bradley scoffed. "Unintentional? I don't care what it was. Stand at least 3 feet back unless absolutely necessary. The last thing I need is contamination in my OR." The tension was immediate, filling the room like a thick fog. The other staff members glanced at each other uneasily but said nothing. Emily, accustomed to such confrontations, simply stepped back. "Understood, doctor," she replied, maintaining a professional tone. The remainder of the surgery was conducted in stifling silence. Dr. Bradley barked orders with clipped words, his body language rigid and exuding an unmistakable aura of irritation. Emily continued her duties with quiet efficiency, her composure unbroken. But inside, she was replaying the exchange, her feelings of frustration and hurt mixing with a deep sense of weariness. By the time the final stitch was made and the patient was wheeled out, Emily felt the weight of the experience pressing down on her shoulders. Yet, as she cleaned up and completed her post-operative tasks, she told herself she wouldn't let Bradley's treatment define her day. Later that afternoon, Emily found herself outside Dr. Bradley's office, her fists clenched as she tried to summon her courage. She had promised herself long ago that she wouldn't let disrespect slide, not anymore. After a few deep breaths, she knocked on the door. "Come in," came Bradley's voice, sharp and impatient. Emily entered to find him seated behind his pristine desk, stacks of medical journals neatly arranged to one side. He didn't look up, his pen scratching across a piece of paper. "Dr. Bradley, I'd like to discuss what happened earlier in the operating room," she said, her voice steady but firm. Bradley finally looked up, his expression blank, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of annoyance. "Is this about your little mistake? I've already forgotten it. Maybe you should too." Emily didn't waver. "It's not about the mistake. It's about your reaction. I want to understand if there's something specific about my performance that caused you concern. I'm committed to improving. But your comments—" Bradley's lips thinned as he cut her off. "Your performance is not the issue, Nurse Harris. What's the issue is understanding and respecting the chain of command. My operating room, my rules. I don't owe you explanations for how I run it. Emily's chest tightened, but she forced herself to remain composed. The words stung, but Emily refused to show it. I'm not asking for sympathy, doctor. Just clarity. If there's a problem, I'd like to address it. Bradley stood abruptly, towering over her. The problem is you thinking you can lecture me in my own office. I suggest you get back to your station before I decide I need a different nurse on my team. Emily clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Very well, she said evenly, though her voice carried an edge. She turned to leave, but before she could reach the door, she felt his hand grip her arm tightly. You'll leave when I say you can, Bradley growled, his tone laced with an unsettling mix of anger and authority. Emily froze, her pulse racing. She twisted her arm, her voice firm despite her growing alarm. Let go of me, doctor. Bradley. But instead of releasing her, Bradley raised his hand. The slap came so fast that Emily didn't register it until the sting spread across her cheek. The sound echoed in the room, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Emily stumbled back, her hand flying to her face. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the office, her footsteps steady despite the turmoil inside her. As she moved down the corridor, her mind raced. She replayed the incident, anger and humiliation mingling with a growing determination. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As Emily hurried down the hospital hallway, her heart pounding, she passed Ron Sanders, the hospital's janitor, who was pushing his cleaning cart. He had been standing just outside Dr. Bradley's office, quietly tending to the floors, but the sound of the slap and Emily's stricken expression had stopped him in his tracks. Ms. Harris, Ron called softly, but she kept walking, her head held high despite the redness blooming on her cheek. He wanted to run after her, to check on her, but his feet stayed planted. Then he heard footsteps, deliberate and heavy. Dr. Bradley emerged from his office, his expression calm, though his eyes darted suspiciously toward Ron. How long have you been standing there? Bradley asked, his tone casual but laced with an undercurrent of warning. Ron swallowed hard, gripping the handle of his mop. Just doing my rounds, doctor, he replied, keeping his voice steady. Bradley's gaze lingered on him for a moment, before he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. He held it out to Ron, who stared at it, his conscience already warning him of what this meant. There's $1,000 in here, Bradley said smoothly, as though discussing a routine patient chart. I trust you understand what this means. Ron hesitated, the envelope hovering in the space between them. Why, doctor? He asked, his voice quiet but firm. Why would you do that to her? Bradley's lips curled into a cold smile. Some people need reminders about their place, he said dismissively. Ron's stomach churned as he took the envelope. The money would help with his mother's medical bills, but the weight of what he'd witnessed, and the meaning behind Bradley's words, settled heavily on his shoulders. Bradley adjusted his coat and gave Ron a warning glance. I trust you'll make the right decision. As the doctor walked away, Ron's grip on the envelope tightened. He knew this wasn't about making the right decision. It was about making a choice between survival and integrity. Hours later, Emily sat in the hospital's break room, her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee. She replayed the incident in her mind, the sting of the slap still fresh on her cheek and in her memory. Ron entered hesitantly, the envelope still in his pocket. He had spent the last hour pacing the halls, trying to decide what to do. Ms. Harris, he said softly, approaching her table. Emily looked up, her expression guarded. Yes, Ron? He slid into the seat across from her, glancing around to ensure no one was within earshot. I saw what happened earlier, he admitted. Her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. I also saw Dr. Bradley trying to bribe me, Ron added, pulling the envelope from his pocket and placing it on the table. He gave me this to stay quiet. Emily's gaze shifted to the envelope, her expression hardening. Thank you for telling me, she said after a moment. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a mix of exhaustion and resolve. I don't want this swept under the rug, but I can't do it alone. You don't have to, Ron said firmly. I'll stand with you. Her lips curved into a faint smile, though the pain of the day still lingered in her eyes. Thank you, Ron. That means more than you know. That evening, Emily returned home to the modest yet welcoming house she shared with her husband, Marcus. He was already in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the air, but the moment Marcus saw her face, the knife in his hand stilled. Emily, he said, his voice tinged with concern. What happened? She hesitated, not wanting to burden him but knowing she couldn't keep this to herself. Taking a deep breath, she recounted the events of the day, the surgery, the slap, the bribe, and Ron's support. Marcus listened in silence, his hands tightening into fists as she spoke. When she finished, he placed the knife on the counter and turned to face her fully. This man assaulted you, Marcus said, his voice low and controlled but filled with barely contained anger. He has to pay for what he's done. He will, Emily replied, placing a hand on his arm to steady him. But I need to handle this my way. Marcus frowned. Your way? He crossed a line. You shouldn't have to play nice about this. Emily's expression softened, but her tone was resolute. I'm not playing nice, Marcus. I'm playing smart. If we rush this, he'll find a way to wriggle out of it. I want to make sure he faces the consequences he deserves. After a long pause, Marcus nodded. I trust you. Just tell me what you need. The next morning, Emily met with Ron and another ally. Sarah, one of the hospital's security officers and an old friend. Sarah had access to the security footage from the hall outside Bradley's office. You're sure you want to do this? Sarah asked, as she handed over a USB drive containing the footage. Absolutely, Emily replied. This isn't just about me. It's about making sure no one else has to endure what I did. Sarah nodded, her respect for Emily evident. You've got my support. Let me know if you need anything else. With the evidence in hand, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer just a victim. She was a force to be reckoned with. Emily didn't wait long to act. That afternoon, she and Marcus returned to the hospital, this time armed with the footage and a clear plan. They went directly to the administrator's office where Bradley was already seated, clearly summoned for an unrelated meeting. His smug expression faltered when he saw Emily and Marcus enter. What's this about? Bradley asked, his voice feigning innocence. Emily met his gaze with unwavering confidence. This is about accountability, she said. Marcus handed a laptop to the administrator, who opened the file on the USB drive. As the footage played, Bradley's face turned an alarming shade of red. This is doctored, he sputtered. Save it, Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. You're done here. The administrator, a sharp-eyed woman named Doctor, Evelyn Porter, turned to Bradley. You assaulted a nurse and tried to bribe a staff member to cover it up? Her tone was ice cold. Bradley's attempts at denial were cut short when Evelyn held up her hand. Enough. You'll leave this hospital immediately and we'll be pursuing charges. In the days that followed, Bradley's dismissal made waves through the hospital. Staff who had been silent before began coming forward, sharing their own stories of his arrogance and prejudice. Emily felt a mix of emotions, relief, vindication, and a lingering sadness that such behavior had been allowed to persist for so long. But she also felt hopeful. Her actions had set a precedent, proving that no one, no matter how powerful, was above accountability. As for Ron, he used the money Bradley had offered him not for himself, but to support a local initiative promoting workplace equality. Emily and Marcus celebrated quietly at home, knowing this victory wasn't just theirs. It belonged to everyone who had ever faced injustice and fought back. Dr. Thomas Bradley's swift termination sent shockwaves through Memorial Hospital. Gossip buzzed in every corridor from the nurses' station to the cafeteria. His arrogant demeanor and reputation as a perfectionist had intimidated many, but now his name was whispered with disbelief. Some were surprised, but others, those who had worked closely with him, weren't shocked at all. His behavior had always walked a fine line, though no one had expected him to cross it so blatantly. Emily kept her head high as she walked through the hospital the day after the announcement. She didn't indulge in the gossip or stop to acknowledge the murmurs of support that followed her, though she appreciated them. Her focus remained on her work and her patients, as it always had. She moved with the quiet dignity of someone who had weathered a storm and emerged stronger on the other side. Ron, too, noticed the change in the atmosphere. People treated him with newfound respect, offering smiles or quick words of encouragement as he pushed his cleaning cart through the halls. He hadn't sought recognition, but his courage in supporting Emily had clearly earned him admiration. Despite the newfound attention, he remained humble, focusing on his tasks and quietly offering help to anyone who needed it. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself fielding inquiries from hospital board members and staff alike. As the hospital's owner, he had always been a distant figure for most employees, but now they saw him in a new light. His unwavering support for Emily and his firm stance against Bradley had earned him widespread respect. Though he preferred to let his wife take the spotlight for her bravery, Marcus knew his role in backing her had been pivotal. In a small office tucked away in the administrative wing, Dr. Evelyn Porter sat with Emily, reviewing the aftermath of the incident. Evelyn was a no-nonsense leader who had taken swift action the moment she saw the evidence against Bradley. She had been appalled, not just by his behavior, but by the broader implications for the hospital's culture. "You've set a precedent, Emily," Evelyn said, her tone both serious and admiring. "This wasn't just about you. It's about ensuring that this hospital is a place where everyone feels safe and respected, no matter their position or background." Emily nodded, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I'm glad we were able to address it, but there's still work to do. Bradley's behavior didn't come out of nowhere. There were signs, moments when others must have seen what he was capable of. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, considering Emily's words. "You're right. This is an opportunity to reassess how we handle complaints and foster a culture of accountability. I'd like you to be part of that conversation." The offer took Emily by surprise, but she quickly realized how much it meant. Being invited to help shape the hospital's future was a validation of her professionalism and strength. "I'd be honored," Emily replied, her voice steady. As the days passed, Bradley's absence was felt in the OR, but not as a loss. The surgical team quickly adjusted to working under other doctors, many of whom had more collaborative and respectful styles. Nurses who had previously dreaded assisting in Bradley's procedures now breathed easier, knowing they wouldn't face his condescending tone or impossible demands. For Emily, life began to settle into a new rhythm. She continued her work with the same dedication, but there was a subtle change in how her colleagues interacted with her. They greeted her with more warmth, their respect evident in the small gestures, a quick thank you, a supportive smile, or an offer to help. One afternoon, as she walked through the hospital's garden during her break, she spotted Ron sitting on a bench, eating his lunch. She approached him, her heels clicking softly on the pathway. "Ron," she said, smiling as she sat beside him. He looked up, startled but pleased. "Ms. Harris, how are you?" "I'm good, and please call me Emily," she replied. "I just wanted to thank you again. None of this would have been possible without your support." Ron shook his head, his humility shining through. "I didn't do much. You were the one who stood up to him." "But you had my back when it mattered most," Emily said firmly. "That takes courage. Don't underestimate what you did." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sound of rustling leaves filling the air. Emily glanced at Ron, noticing the thoughtful expression on his face. "Have you ever thought about moving into another role here?" she asked suddenly. Ron looked at her in surprise. "Another role?" "Yes," Emily said, nodding. "You're smart, compassionate, and clearly a person of integrity. This hospital needs people like you in positions where they can make a bigger impact." Ron hesitated, his mind racing. The thought had never occurred to him. He had always seen himself as just a janitor, someone who worked behind the scenes. "I don't know," he said slowly. "I wouldn't even know where to start." Emily smiled. "Well, if you're interested, I'd be happy to help you figure it out. I think you have a lot to offer." Ron looked at her, his expression softening. "Thank you, Emily. That means a lot." The conversation planted a seed in Ron's mind, one that would grow in the weeks to come. As the weeks turned into months, the hospital implemented new training programs focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Emily played a key role in developing these initiatives, working closely with Evelyn and other staff members. The programs included workshops, open forums, and clear policies for reporting and addressing misconduct. The changes weren't just about preventing another incident like Bradley's. They were about creating a workplace where everyone felt valued and supported. Marcus watched Emily's efforts with pride, often joining her in brainstorming sessions at home. Their partnership deepened as they worked together, combining their strengths to create meaningful change. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their home, Marcus turned to Emily, his eyes filled with admiration. "You know," he said, "what you did, what you're doing, it's incredible. You've turned something painful into something powerful." Emily smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emily felt a sense of peace. She had faced injustice head-on and emerged stronger, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, she knew she wasn't alone. With Marcus by her side, her colleagues supporting her, and the knowledge that she had made a difference, she felt ready for whatever came next. As the hospital adjusted to its new culture of accountability, Emily continued to find herself at the center of important conversations about workplace dynamics. The fallout from Dr. Bradley's dismissal had sparked a wave of self-reflection among the staff, leading to changes that felt long overdue. Nurses began to share stories of subtle, and sometimes not so subtle instances of disrespect they'd endured. What started as whispered exchanges in break rooms and hallways gradually became more open discussions during staff meetings and training sessions. One nurse, Melanie Price, approached Emily during a shift change. Melanie was younger, still early in her career, and her nervousness was evident as she clutched her clipboard. "Emily," Melanie began, her voice hesitant, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Emily glanced at the clock, noting she had a few moments before her next task. "Of course, Melanie. What's on your mind?" Melanie hesitated, looking down at her shoes. "I just wanted to say thank you for what you did. I mean, standing up to Dr. Bradley like that." Emily tilted her head, her expression softening. "You don't need to thank me, Melanie. I just did what I felt was right." "No, you did more than that," Melanie said, her words rushing out now. "You showed all of us that we don't have to put up with being treated like we're less than. I've worked with doctors who've made me feel invisible, or worse, like I didn't belong here. But seeing you stand your ground, it's inspired me to do the same." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was exactly why she had fought so hard, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small. "Thank you for telling me that," Emily said sincerely. "You deserve to feel respected, Melanie. We all do. And if you ever need someone to back you up, you know where to find me." Melanie smiled, her shoulders relaxing. "I appreciate that, really." As Melanie walked away, Emily realized how much the hospital had already changed. A sense of solidarity was growing among the staff, and it gave her hope for the future. Meanwhile, Ron's life was quietly shifting as well. The conversation he'd had with Emily in the garden stayed with him, sparking thoughts he couldn't shake. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a different future, one where he could do more than clean floors and empty trash bins. One evening, after finishing his shift, Ron sat at his small kitchen table with a cup of tea. The envelope Bradley had given him lay unopened on the table. He had kept it as a reminder, not of the bribe itself, but of the moment he had chosen integrity over silence. His younger sister, Mia, walked into the room, her school books tucked under her arm. She paused when she saw him staring at the envelope. "Is that the money you told me about?" Mia asked, setting her books down. Ron nodded. "Yeah, I haven't touched it. I can't bring myself to use it." Mia pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "You could do something good with it, you know. Maybe use it to help yourself move forward." Ron looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Mia said, her tone encouraging, "you've always talked about wanting to do more, to be more. Maybe this is your chance. You could take some classes, learn new skills. You deserve it, Ron." Her words struck a chord. For so long, Ron had put his family's needs above his own. But now, for the first time, he saw a path that could lead to something greater, not just for him, but for the people he wanted to help. The next day, Ron approached Emily during a quiet moment in the hallway. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but nervous. "I've been thinking about what you said, about doing more." Emily paused, turning to face him fully. "And I want to try," Ron said simply. "I don't know where to start, but I'm ready to figure it out." A smile spread across Emily's face. "That's wonderful, Ron. I'll help you however I can." True to her word, Emily connected Ron with resources and mentors within the hospital. Over the following months, Ron began taking night classes in healthcare administration, learning about the inner workings of the system he had been a part of for so long. The changes didn't stop there. At home, Marcus and Emily found themselves becoming closer than ever. The experience with Bradley had reminded them both of the strength they found in each other. Marcus, who had always been deeply supportive, now saw his wife in a new light, as a leader and a force for change. One evening, as they sat on the couch together, Marcus handed Emily a glass of wine and leaned back with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about something." Emily sipped her wine, raising an eyebrow. "Oh? What's that?" "This hospital isn't just a business to me," Marcus said, his tone serious. "It's a place that should stand for something, and I think we can do more to make it a model for what a healthcare institution should be." Emily tilted her head, intrigued. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we expand on what you've already started," Marcus said. "Create programs that focus on mentorship, diversity, and support for all staff, not just doctors and nurses, but everyone who works here. We could call it the Harris Initiative in your honor." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "Marcus, that's incredible, but it's not just about me. It's about all of us." "Exactly," Marcus said. "And you've proven that one person can spark change. Let's make sure that spark keeps growing." The idea quickly gained traction. Marcus and Emily worked together to establish the Harris Initiative, a comprehensive program aimed at fostering a culture of respect, inclusivity, and growth. The program included scholarships for employees like Ron, leadership workshops for all staff, and clear channels for addressing grievances. The hospital's transformation became a beacon for other institutions. Articles were written about the Harris Initiative, highlighting its impact and the people who had made it possible. Emily found herself in the spotlight more often than she was comfortable with, but she used every opportunity to shift the focus back to the team effort that had driven the change. One day, as she walked through the hospital's main lobby, she spotted Ron standing near the reception desk, talking animatedly with a group of employees. He was now a supervisor in training, and his confidence had blossomed in ways Emily had always believed possible. Ron caught her eye and gave her a small wave. Emily waved back, feeling a swell of pride. The journey hadn't been easy and there were still challenges ahead, but Emily knew that the work they had done together, standing up to injustice, supporting each other, and building a better future, would leave a legacy far greater than she had ever imagined. And as she returned to her duties, her steps felt lighter, her purpose clearer. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a catalyst for change, and her work was only just beginning. Terry's desperate protests echoed down the hospital corridors as the officers led him away, his wrists restrained by cold metal handcuffs. Staff and patients alike paused to watch, their murmurs and whispers filling the otherwise silent hallways. The man who had once strutted through the hospital with an air of superiority was now reduced to a spectacle of disgrace. Martha and James followed at a measured distance, their presence lending gravity to the situation. James maintained his stoic expression, but Martha couldn't help but feel a complex mix of emotions. Relief that justice was being served, sorrow for the pain Terry's actions had caused, and even a flicker of pity for a man whose life had unraveled entirely because of his own arrogance and prejudice. As they approached the hospital's main entrance, Terry's voice grew more frantic. "Martha, please," he pleaded, twisting to look at her over his shoulder. "You don't understand. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Martha stopped walking and met his eyes. "You didn't mean for any of this to happen?" she repeated, her tone even but firm. "You meant every word you said, every action you took. You thought your position and privilege would shield you from consequences. But you were wrong." Terry's mouth opened to respond, but no words came. The officers continued leading him to the waiting police car, his once pristine lab coat flapping awkwardly as he stumbled along. Outside, the late morning sun cast a sharp light on the scene. The officers placed Terry in the back of the police car, his protests now reduced to quiet mumbling. The doors shut with a heavy finality, and moments later the car pulled away from the hospital. James placed a hand gently on Martha's shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. Martha nodded, though her gaze lingered on the retreating vehicle. "I will be," she said. "This needed to happen. Not just for me, but for everyone he's hurt and could have hurt in the future." James gave her a supportive smile. "You've been stronger than anyone could have asked for. I'm proud of you, Martha." They turned and walked back into the hospital, where the staff still seemed abuzz with the morning's events. Conversations quieted as the Browns passed, a collective sense of respect and gratitude following them. Later that day, Martha sat in her office, going over patient charts, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. The familiar routine of her work provided a welcome distraction from the emotional toll of the past few days. A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. Looking up, she saw Ron standing hesitantly in the doorway, his cleaning supplies in hand. "Ms. Brown, can I come in for a moment?" he asked. "Of course, Ron," Martha said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. He stepped inside, leaving his card in the hallway, and sat down. He fidgeted with the brim of his cap, a nervous habit Martha had come to recognize. "I just wanted to thank you," Ron began, his voice earnest, "for everything you've done, not just for yourself, but for people like me. You stood up to someone powerful and showed that we don't have to stay silent." Martha smiled softly. "Ron, you played a huge role in this too. Without your courage to speak up, we might not have had the evidence we needed. What you did took just as much bravery, if not more." Ron's cheeks flushed slightly and he looked down at his hands. I don't know if I would have had the courage if you hadn't been so strong. You gave me hope, Ms. Brown." Her heart swelled at his words. "Thank you, Ron," she said. "That means more to me than I can say." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Ron spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said a while back, about me doing more here. I'm ready to take that step if you think I can." Martha's smile widened. "I know you can. Let's sit down together and figure out how to make it happen." The hospital continued its transformation in the weeks that followed. Martha worked closely with James and the administration to develop new training programs and policies aimed at preventing future incidents like the one involving Terry. These initiatives emphasized respect, equity, and the importance of listening to all voices within the hospital community. Ron enrolled in evening classes, his confidence growing as he began to see a future beyond his janitorial duties. His colleagues noticed the change in him, and many were inspired to pursue their own professional growth. Terry Harold's arrest and subsequent firing became a cautionary tale within the medical community. As news of the incident spread, other institutions began examining their own workplace cultures, realizing the importance of addressing systemic issues before they escalated into crises. For Martha, life slowly returned to normal, though she carried with her the lessons and scars from the ordeal. She found solace in her work and joy in the small victories, helping a patient recover, mentoring a young nurse, or simply sharing a laugh with a colleague. One evening, as she and James sat together on their back porch, watching the sun set over their quiet neighborhood, Martha reflected on how far they had come. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked, resting her head on James's shoulder. "It's over for Terry," James replied, his arm wrapped around her. "But the work you've started, that's just beginning. You've created something lasting, something that will help people long after we're gone." Martha smiled at his words, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. "It wasn't just me," she said. "It was you, Ron, Evelyn, the entire staff. We all had a part to play." "And it all started with you," James said firmly. Martha closed her eyes, letting his words settle into her heart. She knew there would always be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long while she felt ready to face them. The hospital had changed, and so had she. And as the stars began to dot the evening sky, Martha knew that the best was yet to come. As the weeks turned into months, the hospital embraced the changes implemented after Terry Harold's dismissal. A sense of unity began to emerge among the staff, replacing the tension and fear that had lingered in certain corners for far too long. Conversations about workplace dynamics, respect, and equity became common, both in formal meetings and casual breaks in the cafeteria. Martha, now an unofficial leader in fostering this cultural shift, found herself at the center of many of these discussions. Staff members sought her advice, not just on professional matters, but on navigating difficult interpersonal situations. Her calm demeanor and ability to listen without judgment made her a trusted figure in the hospital. One afternoon, Evelyn Porter, the hospital administrator, approached Martha during a rare quiet moment in the nurses' lounge. "Martha," Evelyn began, sitting down across from her, "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Martha looked up from her notes, setting her pen aside. "What's on your mind?" Evelyn hesitated for a moment before continuing. "The work you've been doing, the leadership you've shown, it's been incredible. The entire staff respects you, and it's clear you have a gift for bringing people together." Martha tilted her head, curious where this was going. "Thank you, Evelyn. I'm just trying to do my part." "You've done more than your part," Evelyn said, her tone warm but firm. "And I think it's time we formalize that. I want to offer you a leadership position, Director of Staff Relations. You'd be overseeing training programs, mentorship initiatives, and workplace culture policies." Martha blinked in surprise. "Director?" "Evelyn, I don't even know what to say." "Say yes," Evelyn replied with a smile. "You've earned it, Martha, and I truly believe you're the right person to guide this hospital forward." Martha felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. She had always been content in her role as a nurse, but the opportunity to make an even bigger impact was tempting. "I'll need some time to think about it," she said honestly. "Take all the time you need," Evelyn said, standing. "But just know that everyone here supports you, and I have no doubt you'd excel in this role." After Evelyn left, Martha sat quietly, her thoughts swirling. She knew she'd need to discuss this with James, whose unwavering support had been her anchor through everything. That evening, as they shared dinner on their patio, Martha brought up the offer. "Evelyn wants me to take on a leadership position," she said, watching James's reaction carefully. His eyebrows rose in surprise, but a smile quickly spread across his face. "That's amazing, Martha. I'm not surprised. They'd be lucky to have you in that role." Martha smiled, though her expression remained contemplative. "It's a big step, James. I've always been a nurse. I love being a nurse. This would take me away from direct patient care, at least most of the time." James reached across the table, taking her hand. "I know how much you love nursing, but think about the impact you could have. You've already changed so much here. Imagine what you could do with the resources and authority that come with a leadership position." Martha nodded slowly. "You're right. I just want to make sure I'm ready for this." "You are," James said firmly. "And I'll be right here to support you every step of the way." A week later, Martha accepted the position, and her transition into her new role began. The staff's response was overwhelmingly positive. Many were excited to see someone they admired and trusted step into a leadership position, knowing her integrity and dedication would shape the hospital for the better. One of her first initiatives as Director of Staff Relations was creating a mentorship program. She paired experienced staff members with newer employees to foster a sense of community and provide guidance for navigating the challenges of working in a high-pressure environment. Ron was one of the first to join the program, not as a mentee, but as a mentor. His transformation from a quiet janitor to a confident supervisor in training inspired many, and he was eager to give back by helping others. One afternoon, Ron sat with his mentee, a young man named Eric, who had recently joined the hospital's facilities team. They were in the cafeteria, discussing Eric's goals and aspirations. "So, what made you want to work here?" Ron asked, his tone friendly and encouraging. Eric shrugged, his nervousness evident. "I just needed a job, honestly. But seeing how much you've accomplished, it makes me think maybe I can do more, too." Ron smiled. "You can. Trust me, I didn't think I'd ever be in a position to mentor someone. But here we are. The key is to believe in yourself and take things one step at a time." Their conversation continued, filled with practical advice and encouragement. Watching Ron in action, Martha couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. This was the kind of change she had envisioned, empowering people to reach their full potential. Meanwhile, Terry Harold's trial loomed on the horizon. Though Martha and James had initially agreed not to press charges for the assault, Terry's lies to law enforcement and attempts to obstruct justice had led to further legal consequences. As the trial date approached, news of the case gained traction in local media. Reporters covered the story extensively, framing it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prejudice and abuse of power. The hospital remained in the spotlight, but this time, the narrative was one of accountability and transformation. Martha found herself approached by a journalist one afternoon while she was walking to her car. "Mrs. Brown," the reporter called out, jogging to catch up with her. "Do you have a moment to comment on the upcoming trial?" Martha paused, her instinct to avoid the media warring with her desire to ensure the story was framed accurately. "I'll say this," she began, her tone measured. "What happened with Dr. Harold was a painful experience, but it also sparked necessary change. This hospital is committed to creating a safe and respectful environment for everyone, and I'm proud of the progress we've made." The reporter scribbled furiously in their notebook. "And what do you hope to see as the outcome of the trial?" "I hope it serves as a reminder that no one is above accountability," Martha said firmly. "But more importantly, I hope it encourages other institutions to address systemic issues before they lead to harm." The reporter thanked her, and Martha continued to her car, feeling a sense of closure as she left the conversation behind. When the trial finally began, the courtroom was packed. Martha and James attended, sitting quietly as the proceedings unfolded. Terry's defense focused on his supposed emotional distress, but the prosecution dismantled his claims with ease, presenting evidence of his false statements and manipulation. In the end, Terry was convicted of obstruction of justice and making false statements to law enforcement. He was sentenced to community service, mandatory counseling, and a period of probation. As the verdict was read, Martha felt a wave of relief. Justice had been served, not out of vengeance, but as a necessary step toward accountability. After the trial, as she and James walked out of the courthouse, she turned to him and said, "It's finally over." James nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It is. And you handled it with grace every step of the way." Life at the hospital continued to improve under Martha's leadership. The Harris Initiative, named in honor of her late father, became a cornerstone of the hospital's culture, fostering growth, inclusion, and respect. Martha knew there would always be challenges ahead, but she also knew she wasn't facing them alone. With James, Ron, Evelyn, and the rest of the hospital community by her side, she felt ready to tackle whatever came next. And as she walked through the halls each day, greeting staff and patients alike, she was reminded of why she had fought so hard, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. As the months unfolded, the hospital began to see tangible benefits from the changes initiated under Martha's guidance. The mentorship program, now fully operational, became a key part of onboarding new staff. Employees found comfort in knowing they had someone to turn to during challenging moments, whether it was navigating a tense situation with a colleague or simply learning the ropes of a demanding job. Ron's story became a focal point of inspiration. His journey from janitorial staff to supervisor in training captured the essence of the hospital's renewed culture of opportunity. One day, during a staff meeting, Evelyn Porter highlighted Ron's progress. "Ron's success is a reminder to all of us that potential often lies where we least expect it," Evelyn said, addressing the gathered team. "By providing support, mentorship, and an environment where people feel valued, we're not just building a better hospital, we're building better futures for everyone here." Ron stood in the back of the room, a humble but proud smile on his face as his colleagues clapped for him. Martha caught his eye and gave him a small nod of encouragement, which he returned with a grateful smile. After the meeting, Ron approached Martha in the hallway. "I can't thank you enough," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "None of this would have been possible without your support." "You did the work, Ron," Martha replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You had the courage to step up and take control of your future. I just gave you a little push in the right direction." The hospital staff wasn't the only group feeling the effects of the positive changes. Patients began to notice the difference as well. The improved morale among employees translated to better care, creating an environment of warmth and compassion. Families often commented on how the staff went above and beyond to ensure their loved ones felt safe and supported. One day, a patient's daughter stopped Martha in the corridor. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an appreciative smile. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Brown?" she asked. "Yes, I am," Martha replied, pausing to greet her. "How can I help you?" "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice filled with emotion. "My mother has been in and out of hospitals for years, but this is the first place where she's truly felt cared for. I know that doesn't happen by accident." Martha's heart swelled with pride. "Thank you for sharing that with me. It means a lot to know we're making a difference." "You absolutely are," the woman said. "And from what I hear, a lot of that is thanks to you." As the woman walked away, Martha stood in the hallway, taking a moment to reflect on how far things had come. She knew there was still work to be done, but the progress they'd made was undeniable. James, too, saw the effects of the changes every time he visited the hospital. As the owner, he had always been proud of the institution, but now he felt an even deeper sense of connection. Watching his wife thrive in her new role only strengthened his admiration for her. One evening, as they sat together on their patio, James turned to Martha with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about how we can take what you've done here and expand it." Martha raised an eyebrow. "Expand it? What do you mean?" "I mean taking the principles behind the Harris Initiative and sharing them with other hospitals," James explained. "We could create a network of institutions committed to the same values: mentorship, inclusivity, accountability. It could be something bigger than just this one place." Martha considered his words, a spark of excitement building in her chest. "That's an ambitious idea, James." "Ambitious but doable," he said with a grin. "And with your leadership, I know it would succeed." The idea took root quickly. Over the next several months, James and Martha began reaching out to other hospital administrators, sharing their success stories and proposing partnerships. They hosted workshops and conferences, inviting healthcare professionals from across the region to learn about their initiatives. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Hospitals that had struggled with similar issues saw the potential in adopting the Harris Initiative's model. One administrator from a neighboring city approached Martha after a presentation, her enthusiasm evident. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," she said. "The culture at our hospital has been stagnant for years, but seeing what you've accomplished here gives me hope." Martha smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "If there's anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to reach out," she said. The network began to grow, with hospitals across the state implementing their own versions of the Harris Initiative. Each institution adapted the principles to fit their unique needs, but the core values remained the same: respect, opportunity, and accountability. Meanwhile, Terry Harold's life had taken a very different turn. After his conviction, he was required to complete community service and attend counseling sessions as part of his sentence. The experience forced him to confront the consequences of his actions in ways he had never anticipated. One afternoon, while picking up litter along a busy city street as part of his community service, Terry overheard two passers-by discussing the trial. "Did you hear about that doctor who got fired for assaulting someone at his hospital?" one of them said. "Yeah," the other replied. "Good riddance. People like that shouldn't be in positions of power." Terry's face burned with shame as he bent down to pick up another piece of trash. The weight of his choices pressed heavily on him, and for the first time, he began to question the beliefs and attitudes that had led him to this point. His court-mandated counseling sessions proved to be a turning point. Initially resistant, Terry slowly began to open up about the anger and insecurities that had fueled his actions. His counselor, a no-nonsense but compassionate woman named Dr. Lee, challenged him to take responsibility for his behavior. "You can't undo what you've done," Dr. Lee told him during one session, "but you can choose to learn from it. The question is, are you willing to put in the work?" Terry nodded, though the path ahead felt daunting. "I want to try," he said. Months later, Terry reached out to Martha. It was a carefully worded letter, handwritten on plain stationery. "Dear Mrs. Brown, I know that I am the last person you ever want to hear from, and I don't expect forgiveness or understanding. But I felt it was important to express my deepest apologies for the harm I caused you. I've spent the past several months reflecting on my actions and the beliefs that led me to behave the way I did. I am ashamed of who I was and the choices I made, but I am working every day to become a better person. I know my words can't erase the pain I caused, but I hope they can show that I am committed to change. Thank you for holding me accountable when I needed it most." Sincerely, Terry Harold. Martha read the letter carefully, her emotions a mix of surprise, skepticism, and cautious hope. She didn't respond, feeling that Terry's journey of redemption was his own to complete, but she kept the letter as a reminder of how far they had all come. As the years passed, the hospital continued to thrive under Martha's leadership. The Harris Initiative grew into a nationally recognized program, transforming institutions across the country. And though the challenges never disappeared entirely, Martha faced each one with the same resilience and grace that had carried her through the most difficult moments of her life. The legacy she and James built together was more than just a series of policies and programs. It was a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity. And as Martha walked through the hospital halls each day, greeting staff and patients alike, she knew that their work had truly made a difference. Let me know if there are additional aspects of the story you'd like to expand upon. The impact of the Harris Initiative extended far beyond what anyone had initially envisioned. What began as an internal program to rebuild trust and culture at Memorial Hospital became a beacon of change across the healthcare industry. Hospitals nationwide sought advice from Martha and James, eager to replicate the success that had turned their institution into a model of inclusivity and excellence. One notable partnership emerged with Unity Health System, a network of hospitals in the Midwest that had faced its own share of workplace discrimination scandals. The CEO, Dr. Elaine Carter, reached out personally to Martha. "I've been following your story since the trial," Dr. Carter said during a video call. Her voice was firm but warm, and the sunlight streaming through her office window reflected the optimism in her tone. Your approach is exactly what we need to rebuild trust within our system. We'd like your help in implementing something similar across our network." Martha, sitting at her home office desk with James beside her, smiled graciously. "I'd be happy to help, Dr. Carter, but it's important to remember that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes commitment from everyone: leadership, staff, and even the patients we serve." Dr. Carter nodded. "I understand. We're ready to do the work. We've seen what you've accomplished, and we believe it's worth the effort." The collaboration with Unity Health marked a new chapter for the Harris Initiative. Over the course of the next year, Martha traveled to hospitals across the Midwest, speaking at conferences, conducting workshops, and helping leaders understand the intricacies of creating a culture of accountability and respect. James joined her on many of these trips, often using his business acumen to help hospital executives navigate the financial and logistical challenges of implementing such programs. Together, they became a powerful team, one that blended compassion with strategy, idealism with practicality. During one such visit, Martha was approached by a young nurse named Anita, who had recently experienced harassment at her workplace. Anita had filed a formal complaint, but her concerns had been dismissed by her supervisors, leaving her feeling isolated and disheartened. "Mrs. Brown," Anita began hesitantly as they stood in the lobby of Unity General Hospital, "I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story. Hearing what you went through and how you fought back, it gives me hope that things can get better." Martha placed a reassuring hand on Anita's arm. "Thank you for saying that, Anita. It's never easy to stand up against injustice, but your voice matters. And remember, you're not alone. There are people who will support you, even when it feels like the odds are against you." Anita's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "It means so much to hear that." "Thank you." Martha watched as Anita walked away, her steps lighter than before. Moments like these reminded Martha why she had taken on this work. Back at Memorial Hospital, Ron's journey continued to inspire. After completing his training, he was officially promoted to facilities supervisor, a role that gave him the opportunity to mentor and lead a team of his own. His office, though modest, became a hub of activity as staff members came to him for advice or simply to share their successes. One afternoon, Ron received a visit from Eric, his former mentee. Now a full-fledged member of the facilities team, Eric had grown into a confident and capable professional under Ron's guidance. "Ron," Eric said as he entered the office, "I wanted to let you know I've been accepted into the leadership training program." Ron's face lit up with pride. "That's fantastic news, Eric. You've worked hard for this. You deserve it." Eric grinned. "Thanks to you? I wouldn't have even considered it if you hadn't encouraged me." Ron shook his head. "You did the work, Eric. I just pointed you in the right direction." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Evelyn Porter, who had come to congratulate Ron on his latest achievement, being recognized as Employee of the Year by the hospital's board of directors. "I can't think of anyone more deserving," Evelyn said, handing Ron a framed certificate. Ron accepted it with humility, his thoughts briefly flashing back to the day he had first been handed that envelope of hush money by Terry Harold. The weight of that moment, and the decision he had made, felt like a lifetime ago. In the meantime, Terry's life had taken a much quieter turn. After completing his community service and counseling, he moved to a smaller town, far from the city where his reputation had been tarnished. Though he retained his medical license, no hospital was willing to hire him. Instead, he began working at a small free clinic, serving underprivileged communities. The work was humbling, and it forced Terry to confront the biases and entitlement that had once defined him. He spent long hours listening to patients' stories, learning about their struggles and triumphs. Slowly, he began to understand the depth of his own ignorance and the harm it had caused. One evening, as he locked up the clinic after a particularly exhausting day, Terry paused to look at a handwritten note taped to the wall. It was from a patient, a single mother who had thanked him for saving her child's life during a medical emergency. For the first time in years, Terry felt a glimmer of purpose. It wasn't redemption. He knew he couldn't undo the pain he had caused, but it was a step toward becoming the kind of person he wished he had been all along. Back in the city, Martha and James were preparing for a gala event celebrating the 5th anniversary of the Harris Initiative. The ballroom was filled with hospital staff, community leaders, and representatives from partner institutions across the country. As the evening progressed, Martha took to the stage to deliver a speech. The room fell silent as she began to speak, her voice steady and filled with emotion. 5 years ago, we faced a moment of reckoning, she began. What happened at Memorial Hospital was painful and unjust, but it also sparked a movement, one that has grown far beyond what we ever imagined. The Harris Initiative isn't just about policies or programs. It's about people. It's about believing in the potential for growth, even in the face of adversity. The audience erupted into applause, and Martha smiled, her eyes scanning the room. She saw Ron sitting at a table with his team, his face beaming with pride. She saw Evelyn, who had been instrumental in implementing so many of the changes, and she saw James, whose unwavering support had made it all possible. As the applause subsided, Martha concluded her speech. Let tonight serve as a reminder that we all have the power to create change. It starts with listening, with empathy, and with the courage to stand up for what's right. Together, we can build a future where dignity and respect are not just ideals, but realities for everyone. The standing ovation that followed was a testament to the impact Martha and her team had made. After the gala, as Martha and James walked hand in hand through the quiet streets of the city, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had been a path filled with challenges, heartbreak, and hard-won victories. But through it all, they had never lost sight of their shared goal, to leave the world better than they had found it. And as the city lights twinkled around them, Martha knew that their work was far from over. But for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace with the road ahead. Terry's orange jumpsuit seemed to itch more with every passing minute, as though his discomfort was not just physical, but a manifestation of his growing awareness of the chasm between the man he had been and the man he had become. As he sat on the edge of his narrow cot, his knees drawn up, he glanced down at the wrinkled sheet of paper before him. His latest attempt to write to Tara lay unfinished, the ink smudged where his pen had pressed too hard against the page. He couldn't bring himself to start over. The words swirled in his mind, apologies he could never fully articulate, excuses that rang hollow even to his own ears, and a profound sense of regret that felt almost too heavy to bear. The only sounds in the dimly lit cell block were the distant echoes of footsteps and the occasional clank of a metal door slamming shut. In his mind, he replayed the image of Martha receiving her award, the applause of her colleagues ringing in his ears like a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. The headlines he'd overheard from the newspaper earlier in the day were seared into his memory. Nurse Martha Brown, honored for exceptional leadership in wake of hospital scandal. The article had described her as a beacon of professionalism, someone who had taken a painful experience and transformed it into a platform for positive change. The juxtaposition between her triumph and his downfall was almost unbearable. The following morning, Terry found himself on cleaning duty in the prison's library. The room smelled faintly of mildew and old paper, but it was quiet, a welcome reprieve from the constant noise of the common areas. As he dusted the shelves, his fingers brushed against the spines of books he might once have recommended to patients or colleagues. Titles on leadership, self-improvement, and medical ethics stared back at him, their presence almost mocking. One book in particular caught his eye. Redemption, Finding Purpose After Failure. Its cover was plain, the title embossed in simple gold lettering. On a whim, Terry slid it from the shelf and opened it to the first chapter. The words seemed to leap off the page, speaking directly to the turmoil churning within him. True redemption is not about erasing the past, but about transforming oneself in the face of it. Only by acknowledging our failures can we begin to rebuild. For the first time in months, something stirred within Terry. A faint flicker of hope, buried deep beneath the layers of guilt and shame. He tucked the book under his arm, promising himself he would read it later, though he wasn't yet sure if he believed in the possibility of redemption. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Martha's schedule remained as demanding as ever. The recognition she had received for her leadership hadn't diminished her commitment to her patients or her team. If anything, it had only deepened her resolve to make Memorial Hospital a place where every person, regardless of their background, felt valued and respected. One afternoon, as she walked through the bustling corridors, she passed Tara, who was helping a young woman navigate the hospital's volunteer program. Tara had fully embraced her role as a volunteer, finding a sense of purpose and community that had been missing in her life for so long. "Tara," Martha called out, catching her attention. Tara turned, her face lighting up with a smile. "Martha, how's your day going?" "Busy, as usual," Martha replied with a chuckle. "But seeing you here makes it all a little brighter." Tara's cheeks flushed with gratitude. "That means a lot coming from you. I've been thinking about how much this hospital has changed since everything happened. It feels like a completely different place." Martha nodded. "It's been a collective effort. Everyone stepped up to make this a better environment, for the staff, the patients, and even the volunteers." As they spoke, Ron approached, his ever-present clipboard in hand. "Good afternoon, ladies," he said, his tone cheerful. "I just wanted to let you know that we're ahead of schedule on the mentorship program expansion. We've had over 20 new applicants this month alone." "That's wonderful news, Ron," Martha said, her pride in him evident. "You've really taken ownership of this program, and it shows." Ron smiled bashfully. "I've had some pretty great role models." Tara watched their interaction with admiration. It was clear to her that Martha's influence extended far beyond the confines of her job description. She had created a ripple effect, empowering others to rise above their circumstances and strive for something greater. That evening, Martha returned home to find James waiting for her in the living room. He held a steaming cup of tea, which he handed to her as she sank into the plush sofa with a tired sigh. "Long day?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern and affection. "Rewarding but exhausting," Martha admitted, taking a sip of the tea. "I ran into Tara and Ron today. Seeing how far they've come, it makes everything we've been through feel worth it." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've built something incredible, Martha. Not just a program or a policy, but a culture. People look up to you not because of what happened with Terry, but because of how you handled it." Martha smiled softly. "It's not just me, James. It's all of us. Everyone who believed we could be better." As they sat together, the warmth of their home providing a stark contrast to the chaos they had faced in the past year, Martha felt a sense of peace settle over her. She knew there would always be challenges ahead, but she also knew they would face them together. Back in the prison, Terry had finished reading the first few chapters of the book he'd found in the library. The words resonated with him in a way he hadn't expected, forcing him to confront the reality of his choices and the harm he had caused. For the first time, he began to entertain the idea that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about finding a way to make amends. The next day, during his assigned recreation time, Terry approached the prison chaplain, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. "I'd like to talk," Terry said hesitantly. About how to make things right." The chaplain nodded, gesturing for Terry to sit beside him. "Making things right is never easy," he said gently. "But the first step is acknowledging the full extent of the harm you've caused, and being willing to listen to those you've hurt, if they're open to it." Terry swallowed hard. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with honesty," the chaplain advised, "and be prepared to accept that forgiveness isn't something you're owed. It's something you have to earn, and even then it may not come." As the conversation continued, Terry felt a glimmer of hope. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was a beginning. Terry spent the next few weeks reflecting deeply on the chaplain's words. Each evening, after finishing his prison duties, he would sit on the edge of his cot, pen in hand, and attempt to write letters to those he had wronged. The first attempts were stilted and defensive, filled with excuses and justifications. But as he reread each draft, he realized they were more about absolving himself than offering genuine apologies. It wasn't until one quiet night, with only the hum of the prison's fluorescent lights and the occasional distant clang of a gate, that Terry finally managed to write something honest. Dear Martha, I don't expect you to ever forgive me, but I owe you an apology. Not just for the slap, though that was unforgivable, but for everything else. The lies, the way I tried to destroy your reputation to save my own. You didn't deserve any of it. I've spent months trying to understand why I acted the way I did, and the only conclusion I can come to is that I was weak. Weak enough to let my prejudices dictate my actions. Weak enough to hide behind lies when confronted with the consequences of those actions. You showed strength I didn't even realize was possible. Instead of retaliating, you stood tall and let the truth speak for itself. I see now that what I mistook for defiance was integrity, a quality I lacked. I hope that one day I can become someone worthy of the forgiveness I seek. Until then, I will continue working to understand the harm I've caused and find ways to make amends, even if those amends are never seen by you. Thank you for showing me what true strength looks like. Sincerely, Terry. He stared at the letter for a long time before folding it neatly and tucking it into an envelope. A small part of him wondered if he should send it, but he ultimately decided against it. The apology felt too little, too late. Instead, he placed the envelope in a drawer, resolving to keep it as a reminder of the work he still needed to do. Meanwhile, back at Memorial Hospital, life had settled into a steady rhythm of progress. Martha's leadership continued to inspire staff members to strive for excellence, not just in their work, but in how they treated one another. The mentorship program had expanded to include peer-to-peer support groups, allowing employees at all levels to connect and share their experiences. One morning, as Martha walked through the bright, bustling corridors, she passed a familiar figure standing near the entrance to the pediatric wing. Tara was talking to a young boy in a wheelchair, her voice gentle and encouraging as she helped him adjust his blanket. "Tara," Martha called out, smiling as she approached. Tara looked up, her face lighting up. "Martha, perfect timing. I was just about to head to the volunteer meeting. Want to join me?" "I'd love to," Martha replied. The two women walked side by side to the small conference room where the hospital's volunteers gathered weekly. The meeting was abuzz with ideas for new initiatives, from fundraising events to programs aimed at providing emotional support for patients' families. Tara had quickly become a driving force behind many of these efforts, her passion and creativity earning her the admiration of both volunteers and staff. After the meeting, as the room emptied, Tara turned to Martha. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her tone earnest. Martha tilted her head, surprised. "For what?" "For encouraging me to take this step," Tara replied. "Volunteering here has given me a sense of purpose I didn't think I'd ever find again. It's helped me heal." Martha placed a hand on Tara's shoulder, her smile warm. "You've done that for yourself, Tara. All I did was give you a nudge." As they parted ways, Martha couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride in Tara's growth. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and to the power of choosing compassion over bitterness. Ron, too, was thriving in his new role as facilities supervisor. His leadership style was collaborative and supportive, earning him the respect of his team. One afternoon, as he walked through the hospital's basement to check on a maintenance issue, he came across Eric, his former mentee, who was now leading his own team. "Hey, Ron," Eric called out, grinning. "Got a minute? I've been meaning to show you something." Ron followed Eric to a storage room, where a newly organized shelving system had been installed. Each shelf was labeled, the supplies neatly arranged and easily accessible. "Wow," Ron said, clearly impressed. "This is incredible. Did you come up with this system?" Eric nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "Yeah, I figured it would save time and reduce waste. What do you think?" "I think you're a genius," Ron replied with a laugh. This is exactly the kind of initiative we need. You're setting the standard, Eric." Eric beamed, and as Ron walked away, he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Watching Eric succeed reminded him of how far they had both come, and of the ripple effect that mentorship could create. Elsewhere, James continued to expand the Harris Initiative, working with hospital administrators across the country to implement its principles. During one of their evening discussions, he shared an idea with Martha that had been brewing in his mind. "What if we created a fellowship program?" he suggested. "Something that would allow healthcare professionals to spend time here, learning about the Harris Initiative and how to bring it back to their own institutions." Martha's eyes lit up. "That's a brilliant idea. It could be a way to share what we've learned while fostering a network of like-minded leaders." The fellowship program quickly gained traction, attracting applicants from across the country. Over the next year, fellows from various hospitals joined Memorial to immerse themselves in its culture and learn how to implement similar changes in their own workplaces. One fellow, Dr. Anita Patel, had come from a large urban hospital where staff turnover was alarmingly high due to a toxic work environment. After spending 6 months at Memorial, she returned to her hospital with a clear plan for change. A year later, Dr. Patel sent Martha a letter thanking her for the opportunity. "The Harris Initiative didn't just teach me how to improve my hospital's culture, it taught me how to be a better leader. Your work has inspired countless others, and I'm proud to carry that inspiration forward." As Martha read the letter, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The ripple effect of their efforts was reaching far beyond what she and James had initially imagined. Back in the prison, Terry continued his internal struggle. Though he had begun to confront his prejudices and take responsibility for his actions, the process was slow and often painful. His counseling sessions with the chaplain became a lifeline, offering him a space to explore the deeper issues that had fueled his behavior. One day during a session, the chaplain asked him a question that stopped him in his tracks. "Terry, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?" The question lingered in Terry's mind long after the session ended. He realized he had spent so much of his life chasing status and validation that he had never considered the impact of his actions on others. For the first time, he began to think about how he could use his medical knowledge to help those who needed it most. Though he could no longer practice as a doctor, he found opportunities within the prison to assist with health education programs. He began teaching other inmates about managing chronic conditions, understanding medications, and maintaining overall wellness. Slowly but surely, Terry began to rebuild his sense of purpose. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. As Terry settled into his new routine of teaching health education within the prison, he began to notice a change in how the other inmates interacted with him. While some remained distant, unwilling to forget the man he had been, others started to see value in his efforts. One inmate, a middle-aged man named Carl, approached Terry during a break after one of the sessions. Carl had been struggling with diabetes for years, but had never fully understood how to manage it. "Hey, Doc," Carl said, his tone cautious but not unfriendly. "I just wanted to say thanks for explaining the insulin thing. No one's ever taken the time to break it down like that before." Terry looked up from the pile of pamphlets he was organizing. "You're welcome," he said, surprised by the gratitude in Carl's voice. "I'm glad it helped." "It did," Carl replied, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "You know, I didn't think much of you when you first got here. Heard all the stories about what you did, but maybe you're not as bad as I thought." The words were like a small crack of light breaking through the wall of shame Terry had built around himself. He nodded, unsure of what to say as Carl walked away. The interactions like this became more frequent over time. Slowly, Terry began to feel a sense of purpose that he hadn't experienced since his medical career had come crashing down. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was something. At Memorial Hospital, life continued to flourish under the leadership of Martha and her colleagues. The mentorship program and Harris Initiative Fellowship had grown to the point where they became national examples of effective workplace culture reform. One afternoon, as Martha reviewed applications for the next cohort of fellows, James entered her office, carrying a thick folder. "You're going to want to see this," James said, setting the folder on her desk. "What is it?" Martha asked, looking up from her paperwork. "A proposal," James said, a grin spreading across his face. "A major healthcare foundation wants to fund the expansion of the Harris Initiative into 10 additional hospitals across the country." Martha's eyes widened as she opened the folder and skimmed through the details. The grant proposal outlined a plan for implementing the initiative's principles at partner institutions, providing training, mentorship, and resources to replicate the success they had achieved at Memorial. "This is incredible," Martha said, her voice tinged with excitement. "It's everything we've been working toward." James nodded. "And it's because of you, Martha. Your vision, your resilience, it's inspired people in ways we couldn't have imagined." Martha smiled, though her thoughts briefly turned to the events that had sparked the initiative in the first place. The memory of Terry Harold's actions still lingered, but it no longer weighed her down. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far they had come and how much more they could achieve. Meanwhile, Tara's role at the hospital continued to evolve. She had become a trusted volunteer and an advocate for patients' families, often organizing support groups and fundraising events. One evening, as she prepared for a family workshop, she found herself reflecting on her journey. The woman who had once felt lost and betrayed now stood as a source of strength for others. Her conversations with Martha had been pivotal, teaching her that pain could be transformed into purpose. During the workshop, Tara noticed a woman sitting quietly at the back of the room, her eyes red from crying. After the session ended, Tara approached her with a gentle smile. "Hi, I'm Tara," she said. "I noticed you seemed a little upset. Is there anything I can do to help?" The woman hesitated before speaking. "My husband's in the ICU. The doctors say it's touch and go, and I don't know how to handle it." Tara nodded sympathetically. "I've been there," she said. "It's one of the hardest things to go through. But you don't have to face it alone. Would you like to talk about it?" As the woman began to share her story, Tara listened intently, offering words of comfort and understanding. By the time they finished, the woman's expression had softened, and she thanked Tara with a heartfelt hug. Moments like these reaffirmed Tara's belief in the power of compassion and connection. She had found her purpose, and it was one she carried with pride. Months later, Terry sat in the prison library, flipping through the latest issue of a healthcare magazine. His eyes widened as he stumbled upon an article about the Harris Initiative. The piece praised its transformative impact, describing how it had created safer, more inclusive environments for healthcare workers and patients alike. The article included a photo of Martha standing alongside James and several of the program's fellows. She looked confident and radiant, her presence commanding respect. Terry's chest tightened as he stared at the image. The memory of their last encounter replayed in his mind, her calm yet firm words, the way she had refused to let his actions define her. For the first time, Terry felt a genuine sense of admiration for Martha. She had taken the pain he had caused and turned it into something powerful, something good. It was a stark contrast to his own attempts at redemption, which still felt incomplete and tentative. Later that evening, as he lay on his cot, Terry began to write again. This time, his letter was addressed to himself, a way to process the thoughts and emotions swirling within him. "I don't know if I'll ever truly make amends for what I've done, but I can't let that stop me from trying. Martha taught me that strength isn't about avoiding failure, it's about rising above it. If I ever want to be the kind of person I can respect, I need to keep moving forward, one step at a time." As Memorial Hospital prepared to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Harris Initiative, the staff came together to organize a special event. The celebration would honor not only the program's success but also the people who had made it possible. Martha was reluctant to take center stage, insisting that the event focus on the collective effort rather than her individual contributions. But James, ever her biggest supporter, convinced her otherwise. "You deserve to be recognized," he told her. "This initiative started with you. Let people celebrate that." On the day of the event, the hospital's atrium was transformed into a vibrant space filled with decorations, photos, and testimonials from staff, patients, and fellows. As Martha took the stage to deliver her speech, she looked out at the sea of faces, each one a reminder of the progress they had made together. 10 years ago, Martha began, her voice steady but emotional. We faced a moment of reckoning. What could have been a story of division and failure became a story of growth, resilience, and transformation. The Harris Initiative is proof that we are stronger together, and I am so proud of what we have accomplished. The audience erupted into applause, and as Martha stepped down from the stage, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had been worth every step. Later that evening, as she and James returned home, they reflected on the path that had brought them to this moment. "We've built something lasting," James said, his voice filled with pride. Martha nodded, a smile playing on her lips. "And it all started with the belief that we could be better. That's a legacy worth leaving." Terry, now nearing the end of his sentence, continued to teach health education and reflect on his journey. Though he remained uncertain about his future, he clung to the hope that he could one day contribute to the world in a meaningful way. The lessons he had learned in prison, though hard-earned, were ones he carried with him daily. He knew he might never receive forgiveness from those he had wronged, but he also knew that redemption was not about others' acceptance. It was about becoming the kind of person who no longer needed it.